Fantastic. Thanks for that introduction, Armel. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. It's always great to get in a room full of thought leaders and people that are living all the challenges that we're all working through together on a regular basis, and you're leading your organizations. As Armel stated, I am lucky enough to be the Vice President of Market Strategy at a software company called Make. If you're not already familiar with Make is an automation and integration platform that enables those that are closest to different business departments to incorporate AI into core business processes in order to make them more effective, more competitive, and ultimately bring that value into their organization on a regular basis. We do that in an incredibly visual way so that you can understand what a business process looks like. And the types of companies we work with are across every single industry and departments within those companies as well, which includes everything from marketing to finance to IT, HR, and everything else in between in every single business process you can imagine. Now we're going to spend 30 minutes together, or a little bit less than 30 minutes together, so I figured you might want to know a little bit about me. If you can't tell from my unbridled enthusiasm, I'm from the States. I live and work out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and I love to ski and I love to play chess, but I'm not good at either one of those things, but I still enjoy it. And I've spent the last 15 years working in SaaS software of all shapes and sizes, and most predominantly working in automation and integration, and was most recently at Adobe before joining Make and leading that here. Now, if you're anything like me, when you're online these days, you're on LinkedIn, you are just absolutely diluted with these types of posts about people talking about how they've automated core processes, they're saving millions of dollars, they're getting 30% returns on those types of initiatives. You see that people are talking about the fundamental changes to the agentic workforce. You see that this is a $4 trillion dollar market. And if you go to YouTube, you even see people in their underwear making money from home with agents do all the work for them, and they're making millions and millions of dollars. And there's this excitement and this kind of a fear, this FOMO, this fear of missing out. It's everywhere. And then you get to, in the reality in many companies, it hasn't been nearly as rosy as people would have you believe. Of course, last year, there was an incredibly infamous MIT study that many of you might have seen. It was actually depicting this painful reality that 95% of generative AI experiments actually fail. And not only that, Gartner also sees the gap between these expectations and reality. In fact, they predicted that 40% of AI agent projects, all the excitement last year, it was the year of the agent, but they expected by 2027, 40% of those projects are actually going to be canceled. Those are just two of the biggest studies that we've seen in this field, and there are dozens more by well-respected teams. Which, of course, leads all of us sitting here today to ask ourselves, what's actually happening here? Is this generative AI technology actually not as great as we all thought it could be? Does it have value for maybe planning your meal at home and a consumer value, but maybe it doesn't actually work out in a business industry? Or is the technology stable? Or did we all just get bamboozled by some serious hype over the last few years? I'd suggest hype is definitely part of the story. In fact, many of us are familiar with Gartner's famous hype cycle. It's been applied to many different innovations over the past 20 years. As a brief refresher, that includes basically some innovation trigger. I distinctly remember November 2022, I was sitting in a hotel in Prague, and that's when ChatGPT first made its mainstream debut. That was our trigger, I'll call it. Then, of course, we reached this peak of inflated expectations where we really moved forward on the hype, and we end up in what they've referred to as the trough of disillusionment. That's, of course, followed by these very fancy words of the slope of enlightenment. That sounds like a great place. I want to be there. And while there's certainly some debate about it, I would suggest we're probably somewhere between here and maybe here in terms of the entire generative AI excitement and what's happening in the broad industry. Of course, this is going to be different for different individuals and different companies, but ultimately, in some ways, we've begun to all accept this actual hype cycle as part of a naturally occurring phenomenon. But why does the trough of disillusionment exist in the first place? And of course, how do we minimize the amount of time that we spend here and move on to that beautiful slope of enlightenment? Now, In my role, I'm incredibly lucky because I get to travel all over the world and talk to small companies and large enterprises and understand what's actually working for them when they apply AI in their organizations and what's not working for them when they do this. I get to hear about it firsthand from the practitioners and from the people leading these initiatives, and I get to match that up with a great deal of study and research about what's actually happening across many different companies. And I can tell you confidently that AI success actually remains out of reach for most businesses right now because of 4 primary barriers. Every one of these we're going to dive deeper into, but the first one is absolutely not nailing the question of ownership with clarity and purpose and urgency. The second thing, we actually heard a little bit about this today already, is that many people often lead with tools first rather than a focus on the business impact. The third one being not clearly gaining alignment across what are the most important metrics that truly matter. And last but not least, that executives often underestimate the surrounding business environment that can either nurture or kill AI initiatives. Now, we'll start with lack of proper ownership. And the painful truth is we see executives that are willing to spend ridiculous amounts of money on driving AI initiatives. But at the same time, they actually don't fully embrace their leadership role as owners. In our own survey at Make with customers, we identified that as the single most distinctive trait that differentiates companies with low maturity AI success and high maturity AI success. It's driven almost entirely by one structural distinction, putting someone and that right person in charge and leading that effectively. Everything else, the training, the structure, the governance, that all lags behind that one important decision. It's actually backed up by McKinsey & Company. They show high-performing AI companies, those that have a strategy, those that can scale their AI initiatives and have a significant financial impact. They're 3 times more likely to have leaders at their organization that sponsor, role model, we'll talk about that one more, and own AI initiatives across the organization. Now, there are many models that can actually work to drive AI initiatives in your organization. Such initiatives can be purely implemented and led top-down, or in other words, a centralized fashion. You could also try and experiment and give teams a bunch of budget and hope they get it right. But most often we see in AI initiatives, they're most successful when people combine the 2 approaches and have a hybrid model of AI governance and management. So that means strong centralized leadership and sharing of best practices, but also a serious commitment to decentralized decision-making. And that approach, when done correctly, you can actually get the benefits of both of those worlds really, truly. Now, we also want to talk about the barrier of tool-first thinking. And in some ways, this is a very common trope, if you will. I'm sure most of you know the saying, if you find yourself with a hammer, then every single problem you come across looks a lot like a nail. And you pull out that hammer at every chance you get. Let's be honest, AI is not your typical hammer. It's a revolutionary technology that most likely none of us have actually experienced in our career. So we've seen it help plan meals at home. We figured out our kids' homework, prepare amazing presentations, and summarize all the stuff that we're too lazy to read. So I get it. The instinct here to use this incredibly powerful tool on everything that you see, that makes sense to me. But I can tell you that I've seen this type of thinking as incredibly prevalent among executives when it comes to AI, and it's not helping their AI initiatives. These aren't exact quotes, and I'm going to protect the innocent by not naming the actual people that said this or the companies. But this is basically the extent of the thinking that goes into it. They think about, hey, can we AI that problem, literally, on every single opportunity they get. This is why we all have a little bit of that exhaustion about AI, agents, AI. We all feel that a little bit. And they're incredibly powerful tools, so we need to understand what they are so that we can use the right tool for the right problem at the right time. This means moving executives away from asking questions like, how many agents do we have running right now? I've even heard executives brag about how many agents they have running right now. And it's like, so what? They need to be asking, how have our customer response times improved? That's an AI-first question, believe it or not. It means from moving away from, hey, how many people are using AI in our company? To how has AI impacted our ability to recruit and retain top talent? So to help us understand these tools a little bit better, and we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about AI as a tool and introducing a bit of a framework. In some ways, when it comes to applying AI in a business, one way to think about it is that AI is actually just another form of automation. Like you're automating the creation of a bunch of text, or you're automating the analysis of some financial data, or you're automating the process of extracting data from something. Any one of those is a form of automation, but ultimately it's just another form of automation. We've been working on automation at Make for a long time, and we increasingly think about automation in a spectrum. There's this entire spectrum that gets applied to different business processes, and on the most fundamental end of that spectrum is a fundamental understanding of automated workflows. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and said, hey, I really need AI to go do this thing. And I say, well, you just really need an automated process. It's been around for a long time. That's awesome. But there are incredible amounts of value by taking AI and these generative AI steps and sticking them into an existing business process to analyze a resume, to analyze financial closing statements, or to determine that a piece of marketing content is compliant with your brand standards. Those are incredibly powerful use cases for incorporating AI. And of course, there is a need and a value of what we would call agentic automation. That is to say, steps in a business process where AI is determining what steps to do with what inputs, and of course, driving that to completion. One way to think about this automation spectrum is just going from fully deterministic, rules-based to non-deterministic. And ultimately, it's just about the extent to which AI is driving the process, or it's a piece of the process, or not even in the process at all. Every one of these, and we won't go deep on this today, but every one of these actually has advantages and disadvantages. And I would suggest even 5 years, and it's insane to make a prediction about 5 years from now, right? But even 5 years from now, people are going to incorporate every one of these pieces of the spectrum in order to automate a single business process. Some of them have strengths, some of them have weaknesses, and they're going to need to be fluid and continue and include lots of them. One of the ways companies often start to think about this capability in automation is they start to come in from the AI agents sort of thing. They become aware, oh, agents are cool, we should use those. But we actually see the most successful companies actually start fundamentally understanding what their business processes are, their workflows, and then moving up in terms of their maturity and how they apply this technology. The last piece in understanding these tools is understand what agents are good at. Agents are particularly good when there's complex decision-making involved, difficult to maintain rules, and heavy reliance on unstructured data. So if your business process is, I need to onboard all my customers when they buy something, you don't need an agent for that. That's a structured business process with very straightforward and common rules without complex decision-making. Now that brings us to the third barrier, and I definitely had a little bit of a qualm following up from the finance guy and talking about metrics and how that they need to be right, but we'll see if I can pull it off. But fundamentally, we see a misunderstanding and confusion about how to apply the right metrics to understand the impact of AI initiatives. If we look at the MIT study that we quoted earlier, we can see that they're incredibly narrow. Kind of understandable, but they're basically looking for, hey, can we impact profit in the next 6 months is basically what they're looking at. And that's what the 95% number came from. And what I would suggest is this approach actually ignores the reality of how transformational technologies actually create value in a business. The 95% failure rate identified by MIT actually represents that 95% of organizations are measuring the wrong things with the wrong time and the wrong expectations. Mr. Gallagher at UC Berkeley actually puts it very simply. We're not experiencing an AI failure. We're experiencing a measurement failure. And so I'll be very keen to hear in the roundtable how you are thinking about measurement. But let's take a look at some of the types of metrics that often get misconstrued in the AI era and better ways of thinking about them in the future. And first, we'll look at efficiency. Very commonly, executives come into AI and they think, awesome, I'm going to have our employees save so much time. And yes, there's time saved in using AI in a business process. But if you're thinking about this more significantly, you should be thinking about how do I bring product to market more quickly? That's a fundamental transformational change in your organization, not just about saving time. And it's about increasing your competitiveness, because I guarantee your competitors are doing it. Traditionally, we think about quality. We think about error reduction in processes like claim insurance management or things like that. But ultimately, success in the AI area means you're managing improved customer experiences. That's what really matters, is higher customer retention rates that come from a recognition that an insurance claim with your company can go 4 times faster than your competitors. That's a worthwhile investment for the long term. Often when we look at dimensions like capability, we immediately think of, okay, new revenue, what's the new revenue that I can support and report in to the CEO? But oftentimes when we actually empower people with automated processes and AI in a process, we end up with fewer handoffs between people. Skill amplification. Individuals are capable of doing more, and decisions are capable of going faster. And what that means is, as a company, you have more strategic agility to be more competitive. And the last piece that we often look at in kind of a misaligned sort of way when we think about humans, people, we had a fantastic session this morning about thinking about people as the driver of change. And too often executives look at AI initiatives and they think, man, this is a great opportunity to do some headcount reduction. And we got to flip that on its head. This is an opportunity to increase employee satisfaction and ultimately empower people to do more and be engaged in their jobs in different ways than they have in the past. So I'd suggest that these are the types of metrics and new ways of looking at these metrics, and they're probably not going to pass the test from our finance team, but something along these lines is how your organization needs to be thinking about to really drive success through AI. The last major barrier is about underestimating the environment. Now, when I say environment, I'm not referring to climate change, although you should not underestimate that either. But when we think about the basic ingredients for innovation inside a company, we often describe it at our company where we look at people and do they have the will to innovate? We look at do they have the skill to innovate? They have the capabilities to do so. And then lastly, do they have the right environment? In other words, the organization that surrounds the people. We actually heard some references to this morning, but AI by itself cannot transform your organization. You need to think about, do I have clean data in the right places and accessible to people to actually be available in a business process? Do I have clarity about the decision-making processes that surround initiatives at our company? Do I enable people with the right tooling, or does it actually take 6 months to get access to a new tool at your company? Do I have the right policies and procedures? And do I have ongoing education programs that support people? This is just a sampling of the types of things that surround everything happening in your company. And AI, in order for it to be nurtured and actually grow, it has to have all these things in place effectively. Your mandate as an executive is simplify the environment. Create the right environment for innovation, remove barriers, and let people grow and prosper. They want to do the right things. But too often, the environment becomes too slow to adapt. So we've looked at these 4 major barriers to getting to that point where you can see AI success. Now, we spent a lot of time thinking about those barriers and how bad they can be, but of course, you're not here just to learn about the trough of disillusionment. That would be a pretty depressing presentation. You want to hear about the slope of enlightenment. In other words, how do we solve these problems? And taken all together, these challenges often occur because executives often fail to see AI in the proper light. They see it as an initiative or a project, but they really need to see AI as a cultural transformation. We've heard the word transformation a lot today, but I think I'll take the winner for the first time to saying cultural transformation, because it's a fundamental change in how you work as an organization. The importance of this point could not be overestimated. We're living at a particularly unique point in time in technology, and your culture has to support this technology in order to be effective in applying it. Similar to other technologies in the past, whether it's the movement to the cloud or all the ERP adoption we all did in the 90s and the digital transformation efforts and the SaaS adoption and mobile computing, yes, AI is a big step change. It's a big, significant change in technology. That's true. It's a change in a way that the many market economics are going to play out. And yes, it's a shift in some of the winners and losers in many different industries. But it's all of these things, but more than anything else, it's a fundamental and radical shift in how we think and actually operate in the workplace on a regular basis. And that means all of us, we have to practice and execute on our cultural transformation skills. That's a hard, big task. So if we're going to use this word very briefly, we should actually just align on what it means. What is culture? on how we think about it. And ultimately, I would suggest it's a very simple definition. Culture at a company is how we collectively think and ultimately how we get work done. It's how you think and how you get work done. That is what defines the culture at your company. Yep, there are other attributes of culture, like how decisions get made, what gets rewarded, what is tolerated, what gets punished in your company. But all of that actually reinforces for all the people at your company, it's ultimately how they think about a thing, how they think about their work, and how they get work done. Or in the case of many cases, they don't get work done. It's all about your culture. So let's make no mistake, changing culture is incredibly difficult to do. I'm not going to be able to capture it in the half-hour presentation. It requires way more time, way more effort and energy than any normal initiative that you've done in the past. But it's a strategic imperative. So we all need to bone up on those cultural transformation skills to be really successful in the AI era. So we'll take a look at 6 major pillars of driving a cultural transformation, specifically around AI. We've talked about some of the themes already, but the first and foremost piece is leadership ownership. This means that leaders actually see themselves as accountable and understand the gravity of the situation that they're supporting. We've talked a little bit about metrics, but again, I would encourage you just to focus on innovation as the primary metric that you're focused on, as opposed to just talking about time saved. If everybody around the world is driving AI transformation projects and your company is simply saving time, doing the same thing, you're not going to be competitive in that broader landscape. Another key aspect of driving a cultural transformation is rethinking how you work. So rather than optimizing all of your existing processes, and we all learned this when we did digital transformation initiatives, that if you take a poor process and you digitize it, then you end up with a poorly digitized process, but ultimately rethinking how processes should work from the ground up. Those are pretty simple, and we've talked a little bit about them. The next 3 we'll talk about more in detail of each one of them. One of them is psychological safety, a belief that individuals can actually ask questions, make mistakes, and challenge things. It's an interesting one we haven't talked as much about today. We'll talk about how you create education as infrastructure and invest equally in it that you do in tech. And last, we'll talk about business agility as a way of supporting you in this dynamic environment. Now, in my career, I rarely get to use this particular fact, but I actually am a psych major. But you don't have to be a psych major in order to understand this. There's some interesting research actually done by LinkedIn recently that 64% of professionals actually feel overwhelmed by the pace of change right now. That survey is like 3 months old, so who knows what it's now, but I'm feeling it, I'll tell you what. And 36% of those professionals actually have confidence that they have a manager they can rely on to help them navigate all the changes that are happening. That's a pretty damning fact. And so the question for all of us as leaders is, how do we create that safety? And the first one I would suggest is name the fear. Tell your employees that, man, we're living in interesting times and I don't know everything and haven't figured it all out. Be vulnerable. Executives that can express vulnerability, that there's a changing place, they actually create emotional connection and a psychological safety that will help their employees be successful. Executives need to embrace experimentation. We haven't got it all figured out. These things are all changing very quickly. And that means if you're going to really embrace experimentation, you also have to embrace failure at the same time. You can't have one without the other. The next major pillar we'll discuss is about ongoing education. Now, it's awesome to see companies do all sorts of things like lunch and learn, day-long workshop, mandatory e-learnings about AI. But ultimately, we have to move from these one-off initiatives to long-term thinking about education as infrastructure, ongoing and routine. First up is leaders lead by example. If you have a leader at your company that says everybody else needs to learn AI, but I don't know what ChatGPT really is, that's a problem. And continually to think about how people learn AI is not just setting aside, hey, we're going to go have an AI class for 2 hours, but actually building time into projects so that you can learn while you're working on a project. Yes, your timeline goes longer, but you're actually working on real use cases. It's important that education about AI has to be tied to your career pathways and incentives. People respond to incentives. We know that. It's also important that we create education that is role-specific. If you create generic education, you're going to insult your engineers and really struggle with your sales team catching up all at the same time. And as importantly, you want to reinforce the use of peer networks, learning from each other. Again, in a time of uncertainty where we all are learning something new together, sharing among peers is one of the most valuable ways to help people engage in this process. The last major piece here that we'll talk about as a pillar of AI cultural transformation is embracing business agility. Now, commonly, you've heard the word agile as referred to as like software development. We had a lesson on that this morning. Essentially, it's a methodology to utilize to ship software products, but increasingly, this term actually applies more adeptly to businesses than ever. In a fast-changing environment, it's super important that you create processes, structures, and initiatives that are fundamentally iterative. If you're creating a 3-year transformation project right now, I suggest you rethink it. You need to think about small iterative steps that can reinforce learning on what works and what doesn't, and move through that in an iterative fashion. That means you're also focused on feedback loops, which means each one of those iterations, you're getting feedback from the right business stakeholders throughout the organization. And lastly, it means that you are comfortable with delegating decisions, and truly comfortable with delegating decisions, because these types of frameworks only work when you have the team of people that are actually working on a project, getting feedback from the right stakeholders, and then able to make decisions quickly and iterate on those things to improve in the future. That's what we've summed up for today. If you take away one thing, it's important to really think about AI not as a project or an initiative or a thing we're doing this year, but fundamentally think about how you're driving AI as a cultural transformation in your organization. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to chat with more of you at the round table, but also, that's not the real booth from today, but it looks a little bit like that. If you get a chance to meet with us throughout the rest of the session, we'd love to talk to you at the Make booth and hear a little bit more about how AI is going at your organizations.